All right, let's discuss finding missing angles using trig. So, previously we've discussed finding missing sides. We've discussed using trig. Both of those could be valuable as background knowledge in terms of this video. So, if you haven't, maybe go check those out if you don't remember how to do that. Otherwise, we're going to use trig to find missing angles, right? So, what we're going to end up using is what we call inverse trig. And so what inverse trig is exactly what it sounds like. So if multiplication is the inverse of division, right, I use multiplication to undo division, and vice versa, I use division to undo multiplication. It's the same with cosine and inverse cosine, where if I take the cosine of an angle, that's going to give me out the ratio between the adjacent and the hypotenuse. Alternatively, if I take the inverse cosine, I'm plugging in the adjacent over the hypotenuse and instead getting out an angle. Right? So previously I could only go from an angle to a ratio. Now I can go the other way where I can plug in a ratio and get out an angle. So this is valuable to us if we have two sides and we'd like to find an angle. And so that's what we're going to use today. Now, step one doesn't really change. Step one is that I want to figure out what angle I want to find. Well, in this case, it's going to be the angle that has the question mark there. That's the angle it's asking us to find. Realistically, we could find the other angle as well, but we're just going to find that the one that we were asked to find, right? So after that, I want to go about labeling my sides. So I'll start with 40. I know it's not the hypotenuse because it's not the longest side, which means it could be the opposite or the adjacent, but given that it's on the opposite side of the triangle from our angle, I believe that 40 should be our opposite side, and I think that 49 should be our hypotenuse. Okay, now if I have my opposite and my hypotenuse, I know that I should probably use cosine, because cosine is sine is our only function that uses the opposite and the hypotenuse. So let's start writing that out. So I've got the sine of an angle, which I don't know at the moment, so we'll just call it question mark, and that's equal to the opposite over the hypotenuse, or 40 over 49. Okay. Now I want to solve for that missing angle, so I have to undo sine, and what I'm going to use to do that, well, it's going to be inverse trig. So I take the inverse sine of the left side, the inverse sine of the right side. On the left side, this cancels out my sines and leaves me just with my question mark, the angle I'm trying to find. And on the right side, I'm left with the inverse sine of 40 over 49. Now, if you're already comfortable with this and you don't need those manipulations, you can go straight from the triangle to our inverse trig statement. That's totally fine. I'm just doing this extra step so you guys can kind of see the logic behind it. Now at this point, I've solved for question mark, so all I have to do is plug that into my calculator so that I can get out that value. So we'll head over to Desmos, and to find inverse sine, I'm going to go to functions, and the middle row under trig has all of my inverse functions. So let's hit inverse sine, and we'll take 40 divided by 49, and I get out 54.72 as an angle measure, which hopefully makes sense. 54.72 degrees. Right, and if I'm looking at my triangle, makes sense. It doesn't look too big, it doesn't look too small, so it kind of fits in there. Right, so that's example one. Let's look at example two. So step one, I find my angle. Step two, I label my sides. I don't have a hypotenuse, so I've got an opposite and an adjacent. And this time, I'm not going to go through the setup step. I'm just going to write my expression. So I'm looking to find an angle. So that tells me that I'm going to use inverse trig. And which inverse trig should I use? Well, I have opposite and adjacent. So that would lead me to think that I should be using tangent. So I want the inverse tangent of the opposite of the adjacent, which is 64 divided by 40. And this way I don't have any extra algebra steps or anything like that. I just have something that I can go and plug into a calculator. So I'll plug that in. Inverse tangent of 64 over 40. And I get out 57.99. Once again, look at the triangle. Probably makes sense. It's not too big, it's not too small. And that would be our missing angle measure. Like always, if you would like more practice or you have additional questions, please reach out to me via email. Any other questions or concerns, that is also the place to go.